I have observed in every aspect of my adult life transformational change. Transformational change is not simply possible, it's inevitable. Because if we don't change, we already know what the outcome's going to be. It's catastrophic. So let's have fun. Let's do the right thing. Let's do what we need to do and enjoy it. And in doing that, ensure that the next generations to come have a living system.
Welcome to Facing Future. After recording our last program with D.Liu and Soumitra about climate impacts in India and China, we carried on with an informal conversation in which John told us about China's history of dire pollution and how decisions made 20 years ago led to it becoming a world leader in environmental restoration. Later in the conversation, he shared some slides of an exciting project in the southeast of England, which he was working on at the time. Hope you'll enjoy this bonus material.
What's happened in China is the situation was so grave. But instead of being freaked out and saying, oh my God, what are we going to do in the next 20 or 30 years? You have to go back 20 or 30 years for China. And they said 20, 30 years ago, they said, oh my God, this is going to be terrible if we don't deal with the pollution. And so this is the type of thing that they came up with. These are all examples which have already been made in China. In my experience, and I've been to 100 countries around the world searching for this, the Chinese are doing at larger scale, and they were forced to because of all the pollution. So where did that pollution come from? That pollution came from the Western industrialized economies wanting someone to manufacture things cheaply and not to have that pollution in their country, but have that pollution somewhere else. So the Chinese got a lot of pollution. And then the Chinese also imported, the biggest export from the United States for quite a long time was garbage. And the Chinese would then separate and recycle whatever could be recycled and incinerate whatever couldn't be. And, so there's a lot of pollution for that until the Chinese said, we don't want your garbage anymore. We don't need your garbage. And so then America has to figure out what it's going to do with its garbage. And that also changes the balance of payments because they're not exporting garbage anymore. The Chinese are not accepting it. So what I see is that this has been done relatively quickly within the last 20 years. And it's happening more and more everywhere. Because if your city on the outskirts or at estuaries going into the sea, you really need to do this because if the nutrification from excess use of fertilizers or pesticides or other kinds of chemicals are going from the land into the ocean, then we're having impacts on the ocean. And so for every country, wherever you are, you need to be on this positive evolutionary succession model where you're increasing the biomass, increasing the necromass, and increasing the biodiversity, because that is returning to the type of climax equilibrium that we actually need.
Okay. So this is fascinating, John, to see that how quickly China has actually reduced the pollution amount so quickly. That's really fascinating.
Well, there's a lot more to do, but
there's a lot more to do, but still they have achieved a lot. In India, I see this when we try to do plantation, mangrove or other local areas plantation. One challenge we find is that there's not enough space. We have to fight, lands are not available. In my city, when I grew up, it was all over, say, second tier, third tier city, all over trees, and I don't see any trees in these days. It's an urban heat island. That's one challenge that I find in working with in India. The second part is that it's interesting that pollution killing about 1 million people every year in India and reducing life for a lot of people with asthma, the lung problem, so many problems with. But on the other side, that same pollution is also reducing the rate of warming for the world. And in India, the rate of warming is half the world average. So that's another thing, and what Jim Hansen calls it a Faustian bargain that you do have. Um, so we do need to have that as we clean the pollution, which is we have to do. There is no other option at the same time. We have to make sure that we have a way to manage that warming that would cause by reducing the pollution.
Well, I think what we've seen is that nature cleans the water. Before the industrialization, you could drink from the rivers. And that was not so long ago. And when we understand this, we have to ask the question, well, why could you drink from the river? And that's the kind of work that this Eco Oasis device, sometimes called the living machine or the eco machine, this is showing what nature can do. This has got 50 years of research. So this is not something which is new. It's just that it was very small. And then it became very useful to the industrial groups because they had such incredibly polluted ponds and holding places. They were grotesque. And so this was tried out in the worst places. You should go and look for Dr. John Todd and his work, and you can see the examples of the most serious pollutants being neutralized to the point where you can drink the water. Now, what we've seen is if we can use this technology with community-based organizations and have the community-based organizations own the enterprise as opposed to the governments or the big corporations or something, then they're the ones who are directly affected because they have to drink the water. And essentially everyone lives downstream. So the value is not only having cleaning the water and having healthier water, but it means you reduce the disease from poisoning from these pollutants. So basically, if you're a young person, I mean, I'm 72 years old, but if you're a young person right now and you're saying, well, what am I going to do in my life? Well, if you want to change the course of human civilization, then the way to do that is answer the most serious questions facing the planet. And what I have seen and what all the people who are working in the ecosystem restoration communities are realizing is that everyone has a role to play, because it is the collaboration of all of our life's energy going together, not the understanding of a few elite scientists or a few politicians who really, in my experience, have ego issues, generally. So they want to have power, apparently, over others. And it seems like if you want to have power over others, you ought to be disqualified because, you don't have the humility or the right characteristics to lead us. So what we see is those people who are collaborating, they're using collaborative learning for collective intelligence. And having that collective intelligence lets them have a collective intention. And with a collective intention, they can act together. They're stronger together. And if we all do that, if we understand what the Indians always knew, that we're one family, and we act in kindness and in collaboration for the good of all, it's not that difficult to transform. I have observed in every aspect of my adult life transformational change. Transformational change is not simply possible, it's inevitable because we can, if we don't change, we already know what the outcome's going to be. It's tragic, it's catastrophic. So let's have fun. Let's do the right thing. Let's do what we need to do and enjoy it. And in doing that, ensure that the next generations to come have a living system.
Very well said, John. Very well said.
Well, don't disappear. I hope that we can work together. We have now almost 100 of these ecosystem restoration communities around the world. And now we're seeing that if they deal with care for the elderly, child care, housing, food security, you're not going to be worried about all of these people wandering the earth with no place to go and no resources, because we have to take care of our brothers and sisters and our grandparents and our grandchildren.
Are there eco-restoration camps in India at the moment?
Yes, there are. So I can connect you, and they need help. But they've been doing wonderful things. They had a lot to do during COVID because a lot of the people fled or they were forced out of the cities during COVID. The people who had come from the countryside and they were just forced out and they had to go home. But when they went home, there was nothing for them to do. And so if they worked together, they could restore the hydrological cycle, restore the wild sections. I would also say something that's really interesting because of the high density. What the Chinese did in the Loess Plateau was they discovered that if you have these degraded states where they've been devegetated or deforested and they've been kind of, the soils are lost and eroded, what was interesting was they had to release large areas that they were attempting to cultivate for nature. And then they processed smaller areas, and only if they could be made flat were they able to use it for agriculture. And so they had to release maybe 50, 60, or 70% of the land for nature. But by doing that, they increased the amount of production by reducing the area in cultivation.
That's very interesting.
So if you do it in another way with perennial polycultures, then you're back to something which is much more normal under the kind of earlier communal organizations that other societies had. But when you do that, you also have to change the way you harvest. So now you have to harvest every day. And it's more like you're gathering whatever is ripe. And you're also sharing some of it with the animals and the birds and the insects. And when you bring that back, you've changed your diet. And
You
when you
become more
change,
healthy. Yeah.
yes, a much more diverse diet, and you get micronutrients that you won't have in those monoculture things. So like those things that we're seeing emerge in the so-called developed
Yeah,
diseases.
it is very fascinating. I was in Northeast indigenous part of India, and it's very fascinating that they have 300 types of rice, 300 to 400, and they put it in this different rice in your banana leaves. That's how we ate banana leaves, and I remember growing up, we used to have so many varieties, and we did that rice, different flavor type rice, different color of rice. And now you don't see those things are gone. Now everything is basmati. It's not basmati we grew up with. It's not that we rarely ate basmati. There are so many different varieties of rice was there, and those are gone because of this industrial production.
Well, actually, they're still there.
They're still
And
there. But yeah,
And communities can save those seeds, they can trade those seeds. And that's one of the most important things that the communities can do is begin to recognize what is the indigenous and endemic biome. What is the legacy genome in that bioregion? And by doing that, that lets them work with the scientists. If the scientists know something about this, but they're extremely endangered, if the people working together with the scientists can go out and recognize this and bring back some of the DNA and propagate it and protect it, and they can do that with all the most endangered species, if they're serious, I think 5 or 10 people who are serious doing that work could save some of the most endangered species, because it's not difficult to propagate and plant out these things. It's just that nobody does it because it's not a job in the GDP economy. We need to realize that the GDP economy is the problem, that we are valuing things which are not valuable, and that it's necessary to do what needs to be done and realize that in a real economy, you can't pollute. There are zero levels of pollution that are allowable. That's crazy. Now we're saying, well, you can have this much or that much. Well, no, why? And so if we get to this level, everybody understands it. And you can't pull the wool over their eyes because they're aware, if everybody knows.
so going back to the GDP in Bhutan, they don't measure GDP, they measure GDH, what they call gross domestic happiness,
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
GDP. And I think that should be the measure for everywhere else, that we do not measure GDP, but happiness.
Could I get your contact information for
Absolutely.
I could put both of you in touch with a group that's working now in Nepal,
Okay.
and they've had a very serious political disruption you may know about. But they have many people who are working, and they're thinking, what will the future be? What will the future be ecologically? What will the future be politically? And of course, if you think, well, it's going to be more of the same, then you're going to have a lot of corruption and a lot of people who are stealing money, or it's all about power and money in some of those places. But if you think that the way the young people and some of the officials in the local communities are thinking, they want to restore the glaciers, they want to restore the rivers, and they want to restore the vegetation and the biodiversity. And so helping them to get to that level of not only understanding but actions.
So, John, I'll be happy to connect with the people. Like to stay in touch with you. And if you know the people in Nepal or India, and make an introduction. I'll be happy to connect with them.
And there's one other thing.
That's what I was hoping would happen here.
Yes.
This was actually a very interesting addendum. We can have another program about it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I thank you for all of this information.
Well, there's one more thing that you don't know about yet. This is so important, I think. So here we are. This is in Kent. So we have now 90 acres here, and this is a botanical sanctuary, the Pines Calyx, and it's a completely carbon neutral event center. So inside, it's a Catalan vault. It's a very interesting Persian architectural plan, but it has terrific acoustics. So in here, we're building a studio to communicate about this. this is a biochar kiln that they've designed and are building. So there's a whole lot of interesting work. So the biochar sequesters carbon for really hundreds and thousands of years. So this is going to be very interesting because it's going to have video, audio recording studios inside, which will then be focused on ecological restoration, both mainly, specifically hyper local, not necessarily only in Britain, but amongst the 100 ecosystem restoration communities, but also eco villages, permaculture, and biodynamic agriculture, and anything else we want to do. So this is something we could do with Facing Future. We could do with your group in India. We want to use it through mass collaboration and mass participation, not make something which is, this is my thing. It's how many people can and organizations can come together to share. And then if we have certain values or principles that we're going to have compassionate and kind and logical communications, and that we're going to look at things from different perspectives, and we will ask a question, we will have a problem that we can all work together to solve. But the most important part is, as soon as we come up with a kind of a conceptual understanding of what we think are the ways forward, we could even have multiple different kinds of, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. And we have enough living laboratories around the world that we can say, all right, who wants to try this one? And then someone says, well, we'll do that in Uganda. And then who wants to do this one? Well, we'll do that in Mexico. Or, and suddenly we can rapidly prototype all the different ideas. And when they actually exist and the trend line shows that they're effective and efficient, then that can take off everywhere. We can just share this information around the world. And so I think this is better than these meetings that are run by the oil companies, I don't know, to sell things, or these other groups that it's all conceptual and there's no way that it actually connects to reality. So this is what I've come to after decades of working in this field.
It looks wonderful, John, and I hope it flies and flourishes. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think we should probably close today, and thank you both so much for being here. It's been very informative and interesting.
Thank you, Dale.